getting the high sign that we are okay on the internet. And with that, good morning to all attending the meeting of the Ad hoc Committee on Transit Funding. The goal of today's meeting is to demonstrate the urgency in addressing a funding and reform solution before the Illinois General Assembly's October veto session and to avoid a transit crisis in 2026 and beyond. The RTA board requested that the service boards present the following items to this committee, and I thank them for their hard work and cooperation. First, the estimated size of the immediate 2026 budget gap and the structural fiscal cliff in 2027 and 2028. Secondly, the timeline and details of the immediate impacts of the funding shortfalls in 2026. Thirdly, details on implementation of efficiencies and cost savings and opportunities for additional system-generated revenues. Staff from the RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE are going to present this information for the committee's discussion this morning. First of all, just a couple of review items, since not everybody here is a member of the RTA board. For the participants who are here in person, please turn your microphones on when you wish to speak and off when you are done, so that we limit the microphones to one at a time. And I'll call on persons that have questions or comments if you're here in person. For those calling in remotely, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise, which may impair the recording of this morning's meeting. When you have a question or comment, if you're remote, please raise your virtual hand. The board secretary will call on the participants who have raised their hands one at a time, and do what I don't do a lot, and that's lower your hand and unmute yourself before you begin speaking. So item number one is the actual official call to order. With that said, I will now call the order of the meeting of the Ad hoc Committee on Transit Funding in session or to order. Item two, Madam Secretary, is the roll call. Will you please call the roll?
Good morning, everyone. Director Carey?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Mondero?
Yes, here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Ryan?
Here.
Director Yonan?
Here.
And Chairman Dillard?
Present.
We have all 7 committee members.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And then additionally, Director Colson? Director Gorman? Here. Director Groven?
Here.
Director Jenkins? Director Katarik?
Here.
Director Rotondo? He is on the Zoom. Dr. Sagar
Here.
and Dr. Walker.
Present.
And then we have CEO, Metro CEO, Executive Director Jim Derwinski, Metro Chairman Joseph McMahon, and from PACE we have Executive Director Melinda Metzger, who is on the Zoom, and then Director Chris Canning. So, yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, and thank you all for your attendance. Obviously, there is immense interest in this topic because it's critically important to Illinois' economy, and we appreciate all of those who are in attendance today as we have a full board room. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from August 11th, 2025. Any comments or corrections to those minutes? If not, how about a motion and a second? We approve those minutes. Director Yonan moves that we approve, seconded by Director Carey. Madam Secretary, can you take a roll call on that?
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Aye.
Director Mondero?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Ryan?
Yes.
Director Yonan?
Yes.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
7 ayes.
Thank you. And those minutes are approved. Please let the record reflect that CTA President Nora Learson has joined us. Thank you, Nora, very much for being here and for all your cooperation. Item 4 is on our agenda. It's called Regional Budget Issues, and Malik Vashnov will be presenting from the RTA and staff from CTA, Metra, and PACE will present their information. But before Malik begins, I'd just like to give you my thoughts as we begin this. So take the chair's prerogative here. This morning, you're going to hear from agency leaders at RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE about how they are preparing for the approaching fiscal cliff. If lawmakers continue to delay action on funding and reform, riders will begin to feel the pain through service cuts and fare increases in 2026, with worsening impacts when the full cliff will come in 2027. We have worked to delay the worst impacts from riders as long as possible. And as you're going to hear from the service board leaders today, we've been collectively able, through hard work, to lower the fiscal cliff numbers for 2026 by stretching every dollar, managing cost, applying a reasonable 10% fare increase to fares, finding tens of millions of dollars in efficiencies. We've also benefited from an increase in operating revenue from the RTA sales tax due to a recent change in state law concerning online sales. These actions are going to buy lawmakers a little more time, but I want to stress the funding gap still looms. At this early stage of the budget process and based off of the work of the budget task force that has met 7 times since it was created and is made up of the finance and planning staff from each agency, we're projecting an estimated budget gap of $200 million for 2026 that will balloon back to $790 million in 2027. And it's going to grow each year beyond that if the state does not enable sustainable funding. The cost-saving actions, along with the higher than expected revenue that I've mentioned, will delay cuts, but it will not provide the transit agencies with the resources needed to deliver what riders want, and that's more frequent and more reliable service. So I want to emphasize again that closing the fiscal cliff is, without additional resources, not going to deliver more frequent or reliable service. Beginning the 2026 year, the CTA will run out of funding and be forced to cut service. Layoff notices to transit operators whose routes are affected by the cuts will go out probably in the second quarter of 2026, with cuts starting in the third quarter of 2026. The budget crisis would also force further cuts to paratransit services. We've seen our friends from the disabled community here multiple times recently, including the rideshare and taxi access programs referred to affectionately as RAP and TAP for people with disabilities. This is unacceptable to me, and I think it's unacceptable to all of you. In 2027, all federal relief funds have been spent or will have been spent, and we will have a full-scale crisis like Philadelphia. The region will experience rolling cuts that will add up to 40% of service to close a projected 20% funding gap. More transit operators will be laid off. The riders will suffer with less frequent and not reliable service. This is going to devastate our regional economy, which produces billions of dollars for all of the state of Illinois from our mass transit system in the metropolitan Chicago area, and congestion will skyrocket among our already overclogged highways and expressways and the region's roadways. The RTA and service boards have been transparent and vocal about this structural funding gap for years. The legislature's known about this for at least 3 years. We've worked to delay the impacts for as long as possible. We have stretched our federal COVID relief dollars to last longer than almost any system in America. Many are out of their money. Independent agencies rank the RTA system as the most efficient in the country. The responsibility is going to and still lies with Springfield, as we are the lowest funded mass transit legacy system in America from our state government. CTA, Metra, and PACE and the RTA have acted early, and We've acted together with transparency and accountability, and this meeting again today will reinforce that. Illinois is the only state with a legacy transit system that has yet to act on funding. New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts have all stepped up. Springfield needs to do the same, and we must act now while the system is still stable. Waiting on a solution means more chaos, more taxpayer dollars wasted as we delay needed work, the layoff of very qualified and great employees, and a continued continue to run a system that's not funded to provide the service that the riders want, they need, and deserve. I want to be very clear about any perception that the RTA is trying to downplay the seriousness of what we are facing, as some have said, as I read the papers this morning. We're trying to avoid we're trying to avoid from reform from passing. I stood up and gave a speech at the City Club in January, and I called for and have been for governance reform since day one. That proposal that I put forth at the City Club in January was called Transforming Transit. It's based on priorities we've heard from riders, from this agency which has been advocating for its continuous looking at what our riders need from the very beginning. And our sincere hope is that Springfield acts on reform and funding as soon as possible. I know everybody in this room agrees that our region and our riders deserve a transit system that's not constantly under threat of being cut. We're going to hear from the service board leaders today, and I so thank them for being here, and the RTA staff for details on 2026. And each service board will be publishing their budgets in the coming weeks. So with that, I now will turn it over to Malik, who can direct the show this morning, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and comments. Thank you, Malik.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee and our guests. I'm Malik Vaishnav. I'm the Senior Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming at the RTA. Today, RTA and the service boards will collectively present to you preliminary budget information as requested in a letter that Chairman Dillard sent at the RTA September 11th board meeting. The intention of the request in this presentation is to inform the ad hoc committee and your discussions and the work of the General Assembly as they consider potential legislation to address both transit funding and reform. All information being presented to you today is preliminary. I can't stress that enough. And service boards are all working to complete their draft budget books, as the chairman just mentioned. The RTA Budget Task Force, which was formed by the board at its June meeting when the legislation failed to pass at the end of the spring session, has met 7 times with the service boards, and the collective engagement of planning and finance teams at all of our agencies has led us here to provide a regional perspective on the fiscal cliff. And this is the 3rd meeting of the ad hoc committee where we have been discussing the budget issues in real time throughout the past few months. I want to also note that the RTA has updated the fiscal cliff number every year as part of the budget process since it was first estimated as part of the strategic planning process in 2022. At the first meeting of the committee in July, we explained that the fiscal cliff, because it is a direct product of the budget process, would be updated in part as part of the budget process. That is when the service boards are statutorily required to provide and update their expenses annually. In July, we also launched the Regional Transit Fiscal Hub as part of our website to keep riders and the public informed of the budget process and the relevant information. Again, the preliminary forecasting is happening in advance of the official service board submittals, but is necessary to get the information we know now out there as transparently as possible. This meeting is being convened in advance of the service board information that is due to us on October 10th. But again, as part of our upcoming veto session, as Chairman Dillard opened the meeting with, it is important that we provide you with the latest estimates as we have them now. Next slide. Oh, I can do that. So today's agenda will focus on staff update on the 2026 budget process so far, including the focus on funding actions, cost reductions, changes to the projected cliff estimates, and other items mentioned in Chairman Diller's letter to the committee. The image on the right here shows our Fiscal Cliff webpage launched earlier this summer, describing our budget process and informing the public that we will be updating the Fiscal Cliff amount as part of this process. At our June meeting, once it was clear that we did not have a funding solution from Springfield, the chairman and board directed that the task of the agencies was to work together with one goal, delaying the impacts of the fiscal cliff on riders. So let's cover what actions have been taken so far to delay the cliff as long as possible. This spring, $42 million of additional RTA funding was provided to PACE to address the projected 2025 ADA paratransit shortfall. This included allocation of the 2025 Innovation Coordination and Enhancement, or ICE funding, from CTA, Metra, and PACE. In August, the RTA board voted on the preliminary funding marks for the next 3 years and voted to shift $74 million in discretionary 2026 operating funding to CTA. These funds are coming from Metra, PACE, and the RTA. Each agency has acted to reduce expenses via efficiencies, which you'll hear more about directly from each agency's leadership. Additionally, during every board meeting, the RTA finance team has reported monthly finance updates that documented the positive budget variances at each agency. These variances are a result of lower than budgeted spending. A significant factor in our favor was the change to the sales tax collection that we first mentioned in 2024 and formally updated the board in June this year, once we had a few months of data that the online sales tax collections were increasing in our region. Improved sales tax received due to this change in how online sales are taxed are estimated to yield more than $200 million additional RTA sales tax and PTF matching funds in 2025. The future annual impacts are already included in the adopted 2026 to 2028 funding amounts you passed in August, and we'll see those in a moment. So on this slide, while we will be presenting the budget numbers focused on scenario 1 on the left in a moment, I wanted to remind you that the RTA board requested the service boards develop 2 scenarios for their operating budgets this year. Scenario 1 assumes no new state funding from the state, while in scenario 2, the state intervenes to avert a fiscal cliff. We did this so that we could be more prepared regarding the state, depending on the state action in October this year or later. Summarized on screen are high-level elements of each scenario that the service boards have provided so far. In scenario 1, the RTA and service boards lower management and administrative expenses. Service boards halt all plans for service improvements next year. CT and Metra will exhaust remaining reserves, which will require budget balancing actions. Again, we propose annual budgets, so even if the fiscal cliff in 1 year shrinks, it is still there. The RTA has already recommended a regional fare increase of 10% that is consistent in both scenarios, and PACE has proposed partially utilizing reserves to fund operation and capital projects. This also means fully funding suburban service in 2026 and making cuts to RAP and TAP in second quarter of 2026. Scenario 2 on the right-hand side, again, assumes new funding is provided by the state before you approve the budget in December. Service boards maintain scheduled level of service if a stopgap measure is enacted in General Assembly. The regional fare increase and administrative savings carry across in scenario 2. Metra also proposes $60 million transfer from operation to critical capital projects, and PACE proposes to partially utilize reserves to fund operations and capital projects and to fully fund suburban service in 2026. And finally, RAP and TAP programs likely avoid cuts with available additional funds. Next slide. Moving to the fiscal cliff update, as mentioned, the service boards will submit draft budgets again to the RTA on October 10th. The following slides represent the latest preliminary estimates of the budget gap based on the work completed in the budget task force, looking both at the unfunded need and the structural cliff. These numbers can change as we work through the remainder of the budget process and as the service boards release their official budgets in the coming weeks. All right, so we will go through three detailed slides of analysis to show where we currently stand. This table shows the differences and estimates between last year's 2026 plan, so that you see in the previous 2026 plan, that is how the $771 million previous cliff number was estimated. And next to it, you see the current preliminary 2026 budget information that we have. And the third column shows the difference between the two. So as you can see here, the agency system generated revenues are expected to increase by $26 million due to the fare increase and partly muted a bit by lower interest income. RTA's marks that you approved in August for 2026 were $232 million higher due to the online sales tax transactions and updated growth rates from Moody's. Additionally, Service Board reserves have outperformed expectations mainly due to this year's sales tax results. Altogether, operating revenue estimates available for 2026 are $454 million higher than a year ago. As you will see shortly, much of this is a one-time boost that pushes back the cliff. Additionally, cost controls, lower spending, and efficiencies identified through good stewardship of limited public resources have brought the expenses down to estimated of $39 million and $77 million in transfers to capital and ICE funding have been removed from this year's estimate. So this nets a $570 million positive change in the 2026 shortfall. With the current information available, that puts the preliminary unfunded shortfall in 2026 at $202 million after all of the Service Board reserves are used. Next slide. So here you see the 2026 budget estimates on the left. But the budget process will also include plan year estimates for 2027 and 2028. So while the news is in the short term is positive, increased sales tax yields and good stewardship of public resources have significantly lowered the revised structural cliff to $684 million. So that's the combination of the 202 and 482 as the reserves are netting out the structural cliff remaining with the remaining gap of $202 million. However, that will not be available in future years to close the structural cliff. Therefore, in 2027, the preliminary cliff grows to $789 million and to $888 million in 2028. We must stress that the savings from efficiencies, improved sales tax, or fare increases in previous slide cannot change the structural cliff, but rather only push the date out further. This slide looks at how the individual service boards are impacted. CTA is currently projected to exhaust remaining reserves in mid-2026, producing a preliminary $130 million shortfall in 2026, growing to $485 million in the full budget year of 2027 and $530 million in 2028. Metra projects to exhaust remaining reserves closer to the end of 2026, producing a $22 million shortfall in 2026 that will grow to $225 million in 2027 and $253 million in 2028. Pace Suburban Service, as we have mentioned, does not have a shortfall in 2026. The remaining reserves will continue into 2027, but start to produce shortfalls of $22 million in 2027 and $47 million in 2028. The traditional ADA budget will not have a shortfall as we are required to fund it first off the top. But the subsidy programs, TAP and RAP, will see shortfalls beginning in 2026 at $49 million, growing to $57 million and $58 million in the plan years. So now we shift to some additional details in the timeline of impacts to riders and workers if no new funding comes through from Springfield. In November of 2025, federally required Title VI hearings will begin, triggered by the fare increases that we are proposing in both scenarios. Additionally, the CTA, Metra, and PACE boards will vote on their budgets, and then the RTA board will adopt scenario 1 budget absent any additional funding. In February of 2026, the 10% regional fare increase will go into effect. In Q1 of 2026, CTA could institute a hiring freeze for non-service positions. And in Q2, CTA could begin the Title VI and public notice processes for potential service cuts, including sending warn or layoff notices for operators. All 4 agencies will begin coordination work on these regional impacts. In April, we could see cuts to the RAP and TAP programs, the subsidized service that allows ADA-certified riders to use rideshare for a limited number of trips. In the third quarter of 2026, CTA layoffs could begin, including union and non-union roles. The first round of service cuts begin at CTA, which will also have an impact on the ADA service area if routes are eliminated. In the fourth quarter, CTA would likely have a second round of operator layoff notices go out with the anticipation of additional cuts coming in 2027. At this time, Metra could also start sending its first round of warn notices. Again, all 4 agencies would coordinate on regional impacts. Moving to 2027, if no action is taken, things continue to get worse. That would start in December of 2026 with the RTA board adopting a balanced regional transit budget reflecting to close $800 million of a fiscal cliff. Additionally, no recovery ratio relief will lead to another hundreds of millions of dollars to be returned to state funds, further lowering transit funding. So in first quarter of 2027, there would be a second deeper round of cuts to CTA service, and Metra would make its first round of cuts, and again, the ADA service area would shrink accordingly. In the second quarter, PACE could send out more notices to their operators, and all 4 agencies again will continue to coordinate on impacts. In the third quarter of 2027, the PACE suburban bus service cuts would then start to go into effect. We have shown the graphic on the right previously, but this is not a one-time event. Cuts to service will decrease ridership, bring in less revenue, leading to further cuts out in future years. With this long-term outlook in mind, I want to remind everyone here that the cuts to funding have led to many spending reductions, efficiencies, and fare changes at service boards over the last decade due to state cuts adding up to more than $400 million over the last 10 years. We previously presented this information to you in a previous meeting. And finally, before I turn it over to the CTA, we want to center the conversation back to our riders. Our summer quarterly panel survey just completed, and we asked our riders how would they be most impacted by cuts and how do they think our region will be impacted. In this slide, we asked our riders to rank their priorities if our agencies began cutting service in 2026. Riders are worried about long wait times and travel times for buses, limited access to jobs and other opportunities. Riders are worried about paying more to use transit. They're worried about their family and friends that rely on the transit network. And lastly, riders are worried they have to pay for an Uber or taxi, buy a bike to get around, or stay home without affordable options to travel. Riders get it. They understand what's at stake. Finally, in this slide, we asked our riders to rank what would get them to use transit more often. Ultimately, all of our shared goal is to fully fund transit to make sure that our ridership continues to increase. As we consistently see, service improvement ranks the highest, including getting to your destination on time, service available when they need to travel, and fast service being the top 3 items. Personal security, cleanliness, and real-time information are also all important, but service comes first. All of this requires investment beyond the fiscal cliff estimates I just walked through. And we will continue to point the State General Assembly in this direction for a long-term structural funding solution that fully funds transit. With that, I'm going to turn it over to CTA, and our intention is to hear from them, Metra and PACE, then open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Malik. Nora, before you begin, I just want to point out, because this gets lost a lot of times, you'll hear us talk about being the lowest funded from state government mass transit system in America at like 17%. And you'll always hear us talk about on ADA paratransit funding, the state only reimburses us a few percent of the 400 some million in those costs. But this slide on page 13, the declining state funds have contributed to the shortfall. I want to point out, because this gets lost, that over the last 9 years, Springfield has actually cut, I guess is the right word. It is what it is. They have reduced our funding by over $400 million. So the state has 404.4 million in declining state funds that have contributed greatly to the shortfall, all while we are the lowest funded state with respect to mass transit funding and ADA paratransit, which is a mandate. The state only reimburses 3 or 4% of our hundreds of millions in cost. But that one slide where we're down 400 million sort of gets lost in our scenarios. Nora, thank you so much for being here and the cooperation of you and your staff. I know how difficult your job is, and it's really difficult, and you're doing a great job. So thank you so much for being here.
Sure, happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. We are facing at CTA a structural funding gap beginning in mid-2026, which is fully realized by 2027. Our 2026 budget will include 3 scenarios to help explain the potential future ahead of CTA and transit in the region. We will have a baseline scenario that assumes typical state funding levels that solely address the existing structural funding gap. We also have a growth budget that fixes the funding disparity and allows us to close the gap, plus make significant investments to deliver services being requested by our riders. And then we also will have a reduced or cut budget that assumes there is no additional funding to address the structural funding gap, resulting in a significant cut to service. So suffice it to say, it's a complex budget season. I think it's important that we don't just discuss the baseline or cut budget, and that will be a focus of my commentary today, as it has been in previous meetings. We should also advocate and present a vision for the future with transformational funding. And that is something I also saw echoed in our many town halls and engagement with riders over the past several weeks. So I wanted to first give you all an update. We've engaged at CTA in an unprecedented level of public engagement around our budget and around our service. Throughout the summer, we held CTA chat events where we engaged with nearly 1,500 riders at 18 different bus and rail locations about their service in general, but also talked about the elephant in the room in terms of the budget crisis and their thoughts and what they wanted to hear from us. Last week, we also concluded holding 3 budget town halls throughout the city, and we were very happy that over 400 people attended those events across 3 different events. We also launched a budget survey, which more than 6,000 riders have completed, and it is open until the end of the day today, and we encourage people to continue to give their feedback. Some of the key things we've heard is that transit is not only a convenience, but a necessity, and riders can't live or work in the city without it. Without transit, our riders would need to make serious changes in their daily lives. We also hear that safety, cleanliness, and frequency are the most important to people, and new stations and new modern features excite and delight our riders. Across our budget survey so far, nearly 80% of respondents ranked CTA service as their top priority, including service frequency, hours of operation, or service to new destinations. And there were many things striking about our town halls, but I'll share that repeatedly we heard people talk about moving to the region because of the transit that we have here. And we all know that, but when you see people live and in person say that to you over and over again, it was quite powerful and a reminder of the economic engine that is our region and the concern that people have deeply about these cuts. I know there was a requested piece of information around efficiencies, so I wanted to go through some key points around this topic. Also, just some basic facts and reminders about the CTA budget. Our total operating budget is $2.2 billion. The majority of CTA's operating budget is dedicated to labor, which accounts for 67% of the expense, with 90% of the workforce comprised of bargained for employees directly performing frontline or other essential functions. CTA's operating budget has positioned us as a leader amongst our peers in major efficiency metrics, including overhead expense ratio and public funding per trip. CTA is absolutely fully committed to operating as efficiently as possible. This is reflected by numerous efficiency measures completed in all areas of our business. In the past 10 years, CTA has realized over $800 million in savings and revenue growth through efficiencies such as technology investments, energy efficiency, position eliminations and freezes, changes to procurement management programs, healthcare changes, fare collection enhancement, fuel and power hedging, and many others. We are always identifying efficiencies to balance our budget this year, and this year has been no different. As part of this budgeting process, and as previously presented at this board, CTA has identified up to $70 million in efficiencies, cost avoidance, savings, and sustainable revenue growth in areas like scheduling and advanced data usage, and many more. We appreciate the recent suggestions of our partners in the business community that we identify savings and efficiencies, and that's why I welcome the opportunity to share this information today. But getting back to our riders and the people that we hear, there's what seems like an infinite amount of ways to talk about the impact of transit. But we need to remember, and all of our communities need to remember, that 1 in 5 working people in Chicago will lose their transportation access to work if these cuts are put into place. Along with efficiencies, we have responded to RTA's request to include a 10% fare increase in our budget. We're still preparing the planned fare increase for 2026 to ensure no disproportionate equity impact. But right now, we anticipate the fare increase of approximately 10% will generate an estimated $30 to $35 million in additional fare revenue. This means that in total, CTA is identifying $100 million in sustainable fare box revenue and non-fare box revenue growth, cost avoidance, savings, and efficiencies in 2026. But all of our actions together are not enough to address the significant structural challenges we are facing. Before I jump into a few specifics on the impact of potential cuts and what benefits come from an approach of growth and investment, I want to be clear on how we got here and not lose sight of the fact that we are not just talking about a one-year gap, but an overall structural funding gap that starts in 2026 and grows in 2027 and again in 2028 and beyond. So remember, how did we get here to where we are today? The CTA has historically provided 84% of the region's rides and receives 48% of the region's funding allocation. Costs of delivering service continues to rise across the board, and existing revenue hasn't been able to keep pace. CTA, like our peers, has had to rely on a significant amount of one-time COVID relief funding to support our daily operations for the past few years. Plus, while our ridership is rebounding, with more people working from home and mobility patterns are still changed. These combined factors contribute to a prolonged financial challenge for CTA. And without adequate funding, we are forced to look at possible service cuts. CTA's 2025 operating budget includes a significant amount of one-time COVID relief funding of $386 million. We have some remaining one-time funding that will be fully depleted by the middle of 2026, including the one-time funding flexed to CTA as part of the actions taken by the RTA board. This is the $74 million in the 2026 one-time allocation of funds to CTA that traditionally went to PACE and Metra, and the $9 million of capital ICE funding for CTA's operating budget. One area that does help to reduce the overall structural gap for the region is the additional sales tax receipts. In total, CTA is receiving an estimated $133 million additional sales tax revenue in 2026. Given the size of our gap, however, we've only been able to delay when we will need to make cuts in 2026. Without significant funding reform and improved funding for transit, the need for significant cuts remains. The service cuts we may be forced to make beginning in 2026 will be the single largest transit service cut in the modern history of the Chicago Transit Authority. We are estimating that we will need to make cuts up to 25% of our service in 2026. By early 2027, CTA anticipates it may be forced to cut as many as 1,800 non-union and union positions, with many layoffs beginning in the summer of 2026. And I will have a timeline in an upcoming slide. These numbers are down from what was initially estimated at the beginning of the year, due in large part to the fare revenue and public funding growth, the efficiencies we've identified, plus we've been able to make key determinations on cuts to administrative and support functions first to mitigate the overall impact on service. Any potential service cuts will not be a one-size-fits-all across the entire network. CTA will seek to take a targeted approach in an attempt to cause the least amount of harm possible. Potential service cuts will vary by route or line, and CTA will utilize a toolkit of cuts to mitigate the impact, including potential scenarios that I will walk through. What you're going to hear me talk about in these potential impacts very purposefully does not identify specific lines or routes. And before I walk through that, I want to be clear why. And I'll start with a story. As an example, at our second town hall at Truman College, our staff identified potentially, for example, 24-hour service at CTA could end if we do not receive potential funding. Just that one example caused anxiety and fear amongst our riding base and the transit-dependent riders that rely on us. I met a man at the next town hall that came just for that reason to ask me specifically that he works at O'Hare and has to pick his schedule. Should he not pick a schedule that requires him to take CTA at night if we are allegedly going to cut 24-hour service? The words around this matter deeply. And as the leader of the agency that serves 1 million people, many of whom are transit dependent, and employs 11,400 employees, we need to be careful about how we describe this. We need to look at the timeline, and we need to do it responsibly. So what I'm about to walk through are examples of the scale of the impact and the type of the impact. They are all potential impacts, and they very purposefully do not identify geographic locations at this time. So if we are forced to make cuts in 2026, you will see things like bus route and rail line elimination potentially happen. This would shrink the bus network from a bus route of potentially approximately every half mile to a bus route of only every mile. This could mean, for example, up to 39 bus routes eliminated in 2026 and at least an entire rail line shut down. We may need to eliminate some midday, late night, or early morning or overnight service. Rail and bus service on some routes or lines may not start until later in the morning or may end earlier in the evening, plus potential cuts to service in the middle of the day or overnight service. This could mean, for example, we only operate service between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., again, if we are forced to make cuts. We may have to close some rail stations. Service may be ended to some stations, reducing the facility and staffing costs associated with the maintenance around those stations. Up to 10 stations across our rail lines may be closed, and others may have entrances closed or unstaffed. This will mean significant vehicle crowding and longer wait times due to less frequency. Service frequency may be significantly reduced, resulting in fewer buses and trains coming each hour, which will cause crowding on all of our buses and trains and may mean customers are unable to board a bus or train. This may result in 9 million hours lost by Chicagoans waiting for less frequent trains or buses. With regards to the request for a timeline of the actions that may have to be taken here. If funding is not identified, CTA will first take various actions in the beginning of 2026 related to cuts and savings from support or administrative functions, including a potential hiring freeze of non-union administrative support personnel. It is anticipated that the first round of layoffs of employees not directly responsible for delivering bus or train service would start in the summer of 2026. Following these initial administrative cuts, the CTA would look to make 2 rounds of bus and train service cuts. The first cut in mid-2026 will result in layoffs of bus and rail operators, as well as certain support functions like bus mechanics, track maintenance staff, and others. And another round of cuts in 2027 would also result in layoffs of bus and rail operators. This would bring the total potential service cut up to 25% of our bus and rail service. And I want to be clear as you see this timeline, with the layoffs, possible layoffs occurring in the summer of 2026, the notices are required to go out 60 days prior to that. We would want to be very vocal and informative about those layoffs. So you're talking about giving cushion around that already into the beginning of 2026. The takeaway here being that when you hear mid-year 2026, the dramatic actions and messaging around that to our workers and to our riders occurs at the start of the year in terms of ramping up in a real way. This timeline follows how the structural budget deficit is impacting CTA. We have a smaller structural deficit in 2026 that we must address, and that deficit grows significantly at the start of 2027. But there is a future of transit growth and expansion that we should not lose sight of. When we look toward the future of CTA and transit in the region, we want to build on the successes we've achieved this year and ensure we can continue to invest and grow in CTA. Examples of investments that we are seeking to make and that you will see laid out in CTA's growth budget include expanding our highly successful frequent bus network from 20 routes to a total of over 40 routes, crossing the entire city, delivering 10-minute or better service. And I will say the frequent bus network is showing great dividends in terms of ridership increases of nearly 30% across some of those routes year over year. And I've repeatedly said that when you build it, they will come. And when you offer service, ridership follows. We're also seeing an increase in ridership in our new RPM stations in a dramatic way, again showing that investment in transit is what brings riders to transit. Other investments would include improving the frequency across our rail network, especially during the middle of the day, evenings, and weekends, achieving 6 minutes or better frequency across every line, every day, all day, entirely transforming the experience of not having to rely on a schedule and to have high frequency all day across our lines. We are also going to talk about in our growth budget, investing in more track maintenance and the funding that could go to slow zone mitigation efforts in that way. Key to addressing service impacts now at CTA, now that we have hired and we have reached our 2019 service levels, is to looking at what is impacting service. And you will see things like bus bunching, which is a key focus of mine, and very much informed by a lacking of bus infrastructure across our city. You will also see slow zones and the importance of investing in slow zone and track maintenance to improve service reliability. Much of slow zone work is major capital project work, but it can also be affected through track maintenance in our operating budget. And we're going to propose that in our growth budget to remind everyone that investment in those areas will also improve the customer experience. Removing all slow zones on our rail system can save 10 minutes for every rail trip. The slow zone removal will have the greatest impact on the Brown, Green Line South, and Forest Park Blue Line. These lines, especially the Forest Park branch, have significant stretches of reduced train speeds. We'll look to invest in opportunities to improve bus speeds. For every 1 mile per hour bus speeds improve, the agency saves $80 million in travel times, meaning less buses doing the same amount of work or more, allowing us to reinvest those savings in service. We will create new connections in our communities that reduce transfers and bring more neighborhoods and commercial corridors within reach for riders. We will expand on some of the recent enhancements we've achieved this year, like the reimagining of the Pulaski corridor by extending the number 3 Pulaski route to Daly College, Ford City Mall, and creating seamless connections across most of the west side of the city. We would seek to reduce the number of transfers for riders and make more seamless one-seat connections across most of our city. Doubling our cleaning efforts at stations and on CTA buses and trains to help create a cleaner, better ride for all of our customers. And we will build on our existing partnerships with the Department of Family and Support Services and other community partners to reach more riders and provide more support to the city's unhoused and individuals struggling with drug addiction and mental illness. In closing, I'll remind us of several stats I think you've seen before and certainly are worth saying again. The return on investment of investing in transit is higher than most any other public service. Transit contributes $35 billion in economic impact, more than technology, food, manufacturing, arts and culture, and education. It has a 13 times return on investment. For every $1 invested in transit, it generates $13 in economic activity. The travel time savings in the Chicago region from transit translates to $3,200 in savings per household. And without transit, travel times would be 35% higher. A $1.5 billion increase in transit funding plus regional policy prioritizing transit will create a more robust regional transit system, leading to more transit trips each year, shorter travel times for everyone, more sustainable and healthy communities, enhanced affordability and reduced costs of living, and a region that functions better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Let's, questions or comments for the CTA, and then we'll go on to Jim. Or Jim, do you want to, Malik, what do you think is best?
I think we should continue through the presentations since Melinda is remotely available. So
Great.
we can go to Jim and then Melinda.
Super. Thanks, Nora. Love your vision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and the RTA board. My pleasure to be here today. I have a very similar story to the CTA, but slightly different, as we are different operators and operate in different set of circumstances, and we actually have a different financial outlook. So I will walk you through that and look forward to your questions at the end. I want to start off with just showing a little bit of what ridership's been doing, because I think that's always important. The far left, you can see where ridership was right prior to the pandemic. And as I've talked about before, commuter in this country took the biggest hit when the pandemic occurred. And it's mostly due to the fact that our riders had the ability to work from home. So that collapse that occurred in the beginning, we've seen steady growth. And right now, year over year, in this period of time, we're still over 10% growth. We have not plateaued. We continue to see new records being set, but they're sporadic. Last Wednesday, we had the second highest day since the pandemic. I can't tell you why everybody came to work on Wednesday. At least downtown, that's our primary rider. So we continue to watch this very unique ridership pattern. It's certainly not the same as it was before. Mondays and Fridays are clearly depressed. You might have had a nice, easy sail into the office today, as it's Friday. So I want to talk a little bit about how we use the COVID money through the pandemic, similar to what the CTA does. But I wanted to start in the beginning of the pre-pandemic numbers and our final numbers of 2019, what the expenses were. Really what I'm trying to get at here is taking a look at when we hit 2020, that we actually reduced service dramatically. When our ridership dipped, we dropped service dramatically because we had such uncertainty of funding, and we wanted to make sure we could stretch out the funding we had as long as we could. As you may recall, it was September of 2020 and it was December of 2020, we received notification that the federal government was going to give us federal relief money. And as those monies started coming in, we were starting to do our projections of the future as we watched our ridership start to climb, and of course, all the uncertainty we had around the pandemic. As we went into 21, it was April of 21 that the federal government provided a third round of federal relief money and the final round of federal relief money. As we built the budgets from 21 to 22, we actually projected that Metro would run out of its federal COVID relief money in 24. We sit here obviously in 25 and have a better story to tell, and most of it's because of that orange bar in the middle. An orange bar in the middle is, as been pointed out many a times, is significant tax growth even through this period. So as we march forward, getting to 24 and our final numbers of 24, we still had significant dollars that we were able to use. And you see the fares slowly starting to creep back up as the ridership gains. But then we get to 2025, and this is where we start having this conversation that we're having today. Our projections for 2025 budget included building regional rail, which that's been a struggle to do. We work on the National Railway Network, and as a lot of you know, as I've explained, getting trains on in those slots, specifically on those freight lines, is very difficult. And I've warned, if we remove those trains from those slots, it will be very difficult to put those trains back. So any actions that we do take in the near future are going to be very, very well thought out and very deliberate as we understand unintended consequences. We just unfortunately don't operate on city streets. I don't have a DOT that provides our roadbed. So getting into 26 projections, our 26 projections show an increase in expense. They show a fare increase of 10%, and they show our deficit at the top in red. I'm also going to point out that on top of the blue bar, we've got another bar that we call fare box capital, and I want to talk a little bit about that because I know inside the discussions that have been happening for the past several months about fare box capital and Metro not using fare box capital. So for 30 of the first 35 years Metro was in existence, Metro set aside or projected and put in fare box capital. What does Metro use fare box capital for? It's specific projects that don't have the federal requirements behind it, and the biggest one is local match money for federal discretionary grants. And I want to give an example that we did not put fare box capital in throughout the COVID period. We had fare box capital planned in 2020, but our read of the federal COVID relief money was we could not have an overage that spilled in the capital. Therefore, for these last 5 years, we stopped putting fare box capital in. This is not something new. And in some cases, what this is now starting to really have an effect. We need to catch up. When the pandemic hit, we had so much money in fare box capital. We've missed opportunities as a region to get more federal dollars back here. And a great example of this is what's called RVR, the Rail Vehicle Replacement Program. We were only able to leverage what we could out of our fare box capital to go after a grant. We were a recipient of the grant, as CTA was, but that was our speed limit. Our speed limit was what we had in local match money. So our need for fare box capital is not just to do something fancy, and I'll talk about what we really want to do with it, but it is to have the ability to have to do local match toward federal discretionary grants. Illinois is a donor state. It is time that we start taking back some of that money from the federal government through the discretionary grant program, and without that flexibility, we lose that. The other one is I've talked to you many a times. I think I spoke to this board the first time in 2019 about Metro's bridges. The 926 bridges we operate over every day, the 446 we own. In 2021, we did a deep dive into our bridges and we said, hey, there's a real need here to address 210 of those bridges. These bridges aren't cheap and they're part of the National Railway Network. And in this case, those are the ones Metro has eyes on. The balance of those that are owned by freight, Metro has financial obligation for. That's not even to be discussed here at this time. What I'm getting to is we told you we were going to build a program, and we built the program, and we started funding that program. And we look at that program as a 20-year program, and we're doing it on the low end. with multiple phases. And we're starting the PE and NEPA to start getting some of these bridges addressed, both rehabilitation and replacement. Our plan is 5 rehabilitations a year, 10 replacements a year for the approximately 20 years. Without a continual funding source for debt repayment, we cannot execute this type of program. There's great loan programs that are fostered by the federal government with a lot of good federal money to bring back to Illinois here. This is not going to hit the region, but we absolutely need a way to pay off that debt as we go taking a look and funding this multi-phased program. Moving on to 2027, as Nora pointed out, this is the real hole. This is the bigger hole. Our hole in 2026, I projected 82 million, not 22 million because of the 60 million Farebox capital. And then you can see that continuing on. And in 2027, as Nora pointed out, that's when the region really gets hit with the full brunt of losing all federal relief COVID funding. How did we get here this year? Just taking a quick look, we projected originally $93 million was going to be needed. We had positive taxes, we had positive revenues come in. That brought us up to 110 million. That 110 million, looking at that whole of 222 with, again, projected good marks on taxes next year, some other revenues next year, that's how we get to the 82 million. Again, that 82 million, a bar on the far right, also includes 60 million of Met Cap that Metra's looking to budget. 27 and beyond, this is when it gets serious for Metra. At what the CTA did this year and talking to the riders, we absolutely will be out talking with our riders next year if a funding scenario doesn't come forth. For Metra, it looks like toward the end of the year, we would have to start looking at those reductions. Service reductions up to 40%. We say that because there's a lot of variability in here. And I think that's one of the biggest things about sitting around. And I love working with my budget folks because everything's got to fit in the spreadsheet. But the reality is the spreadsheet doesn't talk about the rider that left CTA and went to Metra because they closed the station. And it doesn't talk about the difference in revenues. And that takes time to evaluate. But in general, our trains would go down to like once an hour, every 2 hours on the weekend. This is totally reversing all the work we've put in recently and seen biggest gains on our weekend ridership is one of our biggest gain areas. Our discretionary ridership is another one of our big gain areas. We do list out here a elimination of potentially a Blue Island branch. There's a lot of analysis that has to happen there. The idea is the fact that we also run another line through Blue Island, and CTA has robust service through Blue Island, but I would never eliminate Blue Island branch if in fact that created a transit hole for the region, if in fact CTA reduced stuff. So a lot of this is going to come down to very intense conversation and coordination between the agencies. We'd also probably have to eliminate very early morning trains and late trains. We run nothing 24 hours. There'd be corresponding reductions to the workforce, both in contract and non-contract. And it's very similar to CTA, 66% of our work is done, our budget is labor cost. So there's the big numbers. And if you go to the 40% and you go to these numbers, it's 267 weekday trains. Today we run 665. We actually are trying to put more trains on now if we can get permission from the freight railroads with the proposed schedules that we have, 189 trains on the weekends. This would completely change the way people use Metra. So on the timeline, next summer, we would start looking at the very specific, what those cuts would have to look like. And similar to CTA, we would hold either town hall meetings or regional meetings. Obviously, we go through the 3,400 square miles of territory, so we'd have to have meetings in a lot of different places to understand what our riders feel about these specific cuts. I don't see a scenario where we just completely eliminate a line, but more so reduce service on lines because of the vastness of the hub and spokes that we have to operate. The normal budget pattern would continue in the fall, and then public hearings, of course, as we would propose budgets into 27, which will likely have the hole in it if we don't get the fiscal relief. And then fare increases would be potentially on the board again in 27 to help stave off some of that, again, service reductions. And then what service reductions would have to be played out would probably take place when those fare increases occur in 2027. Similar to CTA, the Warren Act basically says 60 days. We also have specific requirements in our collective bargaining agreements I don't need to get into today, as this is not that time where we're going to have to execute on that. Again, coordination with other transit agencies, I want to again say, we don't want to unintentionally create service holes. We've talked about this. The service boards talk about this on the operations level all the time. Whether or not some advocates or non-advocates don't believe we do talk, we talk all the time about the passenger and about how that passenger experience is, and making sure the elimination of one of our trains or the addition of one of our trains or the actual schedule adjustment of one of our trains, and how does that affect our other two service providers for those people that transfer between services. Again, use Blue Island as a great example. If CTA were to choose that region where they were doing service cuts and Metro decided that's where we were going to do a big service cut, that's not the direction we want to head. We do not want to create unintended service holes in the region. We're going to have a different look at the efficiencies. Like CTA, we every single year are looking at fuel, looking at efficiencies, bringing in technology, reducing licensing costs, and this is an ongoing scenario. We've just brought over 800 employees from the Union Pacific. We're looking at eventually purchasing some of those facilities, and we know we'll find more realization of efficiencies once we're the owner of those facilities, and we'll be able to repurpose some of the workload through those facilities, and that'll be another big driver for future reductions in cost efficiencies. And my final slide before I turn it over to Pace is to take us through just a quick history lesson, if I will. So in 1970, the Illinois had to get together and redo its constitution to allow public funding to go to private entities for the first time. That is the precursor to Metro, PACE, and CTA. When they passed that constitution, that formed the basis to have the referendum pass and form the RTA in 1974. In 1974, there was really no formulas. What there was some money that came from the General Assembly and then went into the coffers of these private entities managed by the RTA. In the case of Metro, it was the commuter rail division of the RTA. By 1980, RTA was practically bankrupt because there was no formulas and continual funding in place, and the RTA mandated, in Metro's case, that fares double. I'll tell you why that matters. So you can see we were at 79 million rides a year back in 1980 and how much it collapsed. In 1983, the RTA Act was amended, Metro was formed, PACE was formed, and formulas were finally put in place. Those formulas lasted all the way till 2028 when they had to be adjusted again. But it took all the way to 2006, or 26 years to recover ridership at Metro. Now, I want to point out the big thing, the only thing that changed from 1980 to 1981 to 1982 was the fares. The fares doubled. Nothing else changed. And we lost that much ridership, and it took 26 years to regain ridership. In that period of time, work patterns were different. And I want to kind of get to the point of saying, well, in 2008, we did another funding adjustment and readjusted the formulas. Of course, things change. That line you see at the top there, since 2014, Metro's seen about a 1 to 2% decline in ridership. You can easily look back on it now and recognize what that is or was. That was called work from home on Fridays. That was the beginning of remote work. We saw it and we heard about it throughout the country of a lot of our peers. I put that other bar up there kind of saying at some point in time they're going to cross. I believe we are going to surpass where that point's going to be. It's just hard to believe with the fact that so many people have the option to work from home, and that's what we see right now, that we would see the type of ridership that's back there again. However, again, this is the problem with public transportation. It has to be there when people need it. It can't just be there on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. It's got to be there when people need it. So service cuts, even though some might say, well, why don't you just take a few cars off the train, or why don't you eliminate the trains on Friday? It's not that simple, because on certain Fridays, and if you looked at that first slide, you can see all these little weird spikes that happen throughout the course of the year. Those are events. If those trains aren't there for those events, people aren't using public transportation for those events. So that concludes my presentation today. I look forward to the questions after Pace presents.
Thank you, Jim. Hopefully on our Friday, the Cubs will be in the World Series and your trains will be packed.
Yo.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Melinda. Good morning.
Good morning, or good evening. It's about midnight where I am. So first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Ad Hoc Committee. With me today is Chairman Rick Kwasniewski and Director Chris Canning. I'm going to make my comments brief so I can leave you some time to ask questions of us all. But before I jump into the budget challenges that we're all facing today, Pace has over our 40-year history. I'm sorry, next slide, please, Joey. Sorry. I'll get the hang of this from afar. Pace has been, over our 40-year history, very efficient and fiscally responsible while serving many of the region's most transit-dependent riders. We have constantly submitted and maintained budgets that are balanced to available resources while maximizing our service and minimizing our service disruption in focusing on innovative service solutions to help control our cost growth and to provide better service. During COVID, Pace was the first in the region to expend and draw down federal relief money. This decision allowed Pace to preserve state and local sales tax funds to help carry us through what proved to be a very, very long recovery period. And I want to emphasize that along with what Metro said just before me, we took our COVID relief money, we spent that money, and it allowed us to save our sales tax money for a rainy day, which is where we're at right now. As we enter 2026, the RTA approved funding along with approximately $40 million in reserves will hold off any service cuts through the end of the fiscal year of 2026. So we will be proposing a balanced budget for 2026 on the suburban side of the house. The ADA side of the house is a bit different, and I'll go into that in the next few slides. So with that, if I could have the next slide, Joey. So for Pace, no service cuts in 2026. If we do have to have service cuts in 2027, the warn letters would go out to impacted staff in December of 2026. The first round of service cuts that Pace would have to implement would be in the spring of 2027. And in the case, if we still did not have any funding, we would have to do additional cuts in December of 2027 to address the shortfall in 2028. Next slide, please. With regard to the regional ADA paratransit service, the traditional ADA paratransit service is funded for the entire year in 2026. However, the Taxi Access Program and the Rideshare Access Program, which are user-side subsidy programs, would only have funding to operate to the end of March of 2026 unless new funding was identified. Next slide, please. When COVID hit, Pace had already started looking at what kind of efficiencies that we needed to achieve in order to continue to operate throughout the next few years. The first thing we did is we put a freeze on non-union hiring, which gave us a one-time savings of $3 million. We also had converted our South Division garage from diesel fuel to CNG equipment, and that saves us about $1.3 million annually. We built a new garage during the COVID era, and we also started working on our new Markham acceptance facility. Now, having both of those facilities complete, we have savings in some consolidations we could do at the Heritage Garage. We could release a lease we had for our van pool services and move that staff and the vehicles into the Heritage Garage for our Markham acceptance facility, we had to lease computer co-location center. We now have that within our facility, and that saved us funding. We also identified service efficiencies of about $20 million. So what happened during COVID, we continued to operate the service that needed to be operated. The service that was not being utilized, we suspended and eventually took the funding from those services and put it into better services. So that saves us about $20 million annually. Next slide, please. During 2026, the RTA has requested that we save about $5 million in efficiencies and cost savings. That comes out to $13.8 million. $5.5 million of that $13.8 million will be delays in putting in additional fixed route service, more frequent service, more weekend service. It's not something that we want to do, but it is something that if we don't have the funding to carry us through, we're going to have to do. We're delaying some planned on-demand services, another $6.4 million. We're holding our headquarters staffing to 2025 levels, and we're also cutting back on our out-of-region travel. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think Malik did a very good job of explaining where we are in our suburban service budget. The suburban budget is balanced in 2026. We're going to have to use some positive budget variance to carry us through. In 2027, we're going to need about $22.4 million, and in 2028, $46.9 million. Next slide, please. On the ADA side of the house, as you can see, our funding requirements in 2025, thank you to the RTA, to CTA and Metro, and to our own board of directors. We have balanced out our budget for the ADA, the regional ADA service. In 2026, we will have enough funding to carry us through for our traditional ADA service. With regard to the cap and wrap again, we will not have funding to carry us through beyond April 1 of 2026 as we see it today if no additional funding is set forth. Next slide, please. And just to draw this out a little bit more, you'll see in here the tap and wrap program. In the net result is that in 2026, it's $49.5 million short to achieve the wrap and tap program that we have today, although we have made some changes in the program in accordance with what the RTA has requested, which is we've increased the fare to $325 as of October 1st, as well as we've capped the rides at 30 rides per month. And starting October 1st, people who are ADA certified can ride not only PACE services for free, but also CTA and Metro services. Next slide, please. So with that, I would just like to thank the RTA board for the opportunity to be here remotely today and indicate that PACE, like our sister agencies, Metro and CTA, while we understand that there may be service cuts coming, we're hoping that's not the case. We have a revision program to increase our services. We would like to see $150 million additional dollars come towards PACE so that we can put on more frequent service, more weekend service, more late night service. And as we look at the years ahead, we did include in the packet we provided to the RTA board a list of routes that if we have to cut service, these are the routes we're anticipating at this moment. But along with what Metro and CTA have said, as we look at service cuts, we meet with our fellow service boards and the RTA and determine what the other service board is cutting. How can we cooperate and make this better for our riders? That's our goal. We're not going to service a station that is closed. That doesn't make any sense. But there is some possibility if there is one service line that's closing and we have a service line nearby, that we can expand some of our service into that area. So those are the kind of discussions that occur as we get closer to the fiscal cliff. Our goal is to provide the best service we can for all of the riders in the region. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Melinda, and safe travels home.
Thank
All right,
you.
with that, how about questions or comments for any of the three service boards? Everybody's perplexed, overwhelmed. Director Carey will start us off.
First of all, I want to thank all three service boards. They essentially gave us, I think, detailed, in some areas, more detail, but we appreciate that, and it's very helpful. It's what we asked you to do. We knew the real numbers are due next Friday, and we look forward to that. But I have, I'm going to start with Metro, and I have a question about the 60 million being moved from operating the fare box revenue and moving it. And I know, Jim, you've talked, passionately about the program. I think it was a year ago, perhaps during that budget cycle, you talked about wanting to start that program and the necessity of it. And I don't disagree, and I don't fault that. However, when we're in the situation we're in, and I went back through some of my notes in prep for this meeting, looking at, different comments, and I found one that said, prioritize operating over capital. I mean, because we have to keep the trains running, the buses running. So particularly until we know, what the state's going to do, I'm not comfortable with that 60 million showing up as being moved over in 2026. You can put it out there in 27, 28, and if it works, it works. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, but I'm just not comfortable. We need pretty much everything to go towards operating right now. And we've had, as Melinda said, they'll have to defer some improvements they might want to make, because we're not gonna move any operating over to capital.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And obviously, this is a pretty sensitive topic. Again, for 30 years, Metro put that over there and used that money in such a way that it was going after discretionary grants, bringing money in. That money saves the region money. That money brings money into the region. It comes in a different bucket. It comes in a capital bucket. From an operating perspective, I'll just say it this way: our bridges are safe, but I don't have a choice. Either I decimate the other portions of the capital program to start funding this bridge program, or I find an alternate source. So this alternate source, as projected right now, would be something we'd take a loan out and we'd use some of that money as debt service. We all know, and I think everybody knows this, it's like if you pay for it today, it's going to cost you far less than when you have to pay for it later. And we just have a great example of our UP North bridges. We did 22 bridges not too long ago. It was 153 million. That particular project right now, the other 22 bridges are well over double that. So the investment of that $60 million now, using those operating dollars, is an investment into the region. It'll come back in a return of massive capital investment.
And I think we all support using whatever monies we have to maximize what we can get back from the federal government. It's never enough. So I don't disagree that anytime we have an opportunity to match, a statement you made in there, you might have to decimate, other capital programs. And maybe that is what needs to be done for a year or two, that if there's an opportunity to put off a station enhancement, to delay something that isn't critical in terms of safety. And I don't know, I don't have the whole capital program in front of me, but I'm just uncomfortable moving that money over to do that. I would suggest, and I don't know where the rest of the board is, but that it might need to wait another year. Until we know. If we get, who knows, but if in October the state decides to actually do something, then it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, we just did our work, pulling together the next 5-year capital program. It's very preliminary. Our board hasn't seen the full package yet. 2 out of every $5 requested is available. That's it. And that's unfortunate. That's why we have such a big state of good repair backlog. So I hear your comments and I appreciate them. I would even suggest that if funding never came, this still needs to exist. We need a repayment stream to actually start addressing this particular need. This board has asked me for 8 years, does Metro have debt? And I've answered very interestingly, no. And some have said, why not? We've walked this path for a long time. This is not an enhancement, although it could be used for other things. This particular need is something that we need to address, or again, our team will have to go back and really take a look at the capital program that's in place. Some of these are long-term contracts that are in place, and so where it gets squeezed, where it gets pulled out of, I can just clearly tell you our bridges are safe. They have to be addressed.
Just one suggestion on this, Joe and Jim, go see the Senate president who has some very strong feelings about this, and literally just tell him what you told us. But go see the Senate president who has some strong feelings about this.
Another point, and I brought this to our board last month, is the FRA just put on a whole new series of training classes to do bridge inspection. There is a lot of leading indicators here that we should be aware of. Again, if no funding became available and we all had to operate with the taxes that are coming in, this still needs to be part of a program. A 1-year kick, it doesn't fix anything with regard to what has to happen with the bridges. It takes a long time to design the bridge. It takes a long time to build a bridge. We just replaced last month a wooden bridge. Now we're down to 4 wooden bridges left.
If I could just add on that.
Please,
And,
Chairman.
Chairman Dillard, thanks for your opening comments this morning. I think they set the right tone for not only the meeting this morning, but the history of the cooperation between the service boards and on both the operating and from the leadership side. I want to emphasize the importance of the availability of funds to go out and attract dollars immediately to address some of the 446 bridges that we own. We have a responsibility for all of those bridges. Our bridges are safe, but these short-term dollars that will allow us to go after grant funds, this loan program, allows us to implement, not to really enhance service or to provide additional facilities or bridges, but to really maintain that level of safety and in that investment in our infrastructure that is critical to invest in annually. When we don't make that investment annually, we see doubling of costs of projects that get put off for 1 year. So we certainly understand and appreciate and want to be a willing partner in trying to find every dollar available to invest in operations to put off that fiscal cliff for all the agencies. This is a classic example of not investing in our bridge and track and signal now will lead to dramatically increased cost in 27, 28, or as we get into 29 and 30 down the road. But so thank you.
Thank you.
If I can just clarify Director Carey's question. So the scenario 1 where the $202 million cliff does not include Metro Capital in our regional estimate of $202 million. So just wanted to clarify that. Metro is proposing to put $60 million Farebox Capital in scenario 2 if the state provides fiscal cliff funding.
Oh, okay, so
No, actually, both.
yeah, that's what I thought. So they're suggesting in both scenarios, they would move the 60 million over.
Right, I was just clarifying our 202 number
Right.
you saw does not include it.
So if it was moved over, the 202 would become 282 or 262. Okay, got it.
questions or comments for our august panel? Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo Director Carey's comments that we appreciate all the work that's gone into this from the service boards, because this is not an easy task. It's a difficult task, but we're at a critical point in our growth and development. So this is for Nora. I'd like to start with Nora. In your comments about the CTA, there were two areas that I was just interested in getting a little more background. One of the things we've heard about is security concerns in terms of trying to address that issue with respect to its impact on ridership and how people feel. So in this budget crisis, I'd just be interested in knowing how does that work into your numbers and your forecast. And the second question, I only have two, would be, you talked about 10% fare increase for the CTA. You put peer numbers up there to compare the CTA to. So is 10%, in line with what others have done, or do we have some elasticity for a greater fare increase, which would more positively impact the cliff if we say went to 20% or 25% increase in fares versus the 10% that you propose? So those are two things I was interested in getting a little more information on.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. First, with regards to security, this has been a major focus in lots of regards for me. We've really deepened our relationship with the Chicago Police Department and have initiated new missions where they are deployed specifically with regards to anti-smoking missions, also the missions called safety outreach missions and code of conduct missions on our blue line. We also have targeted deployment on the red line in coordination with our K-9 security forces that overnight, ever since the spring, we've had forces overnight on every station on the red line from Cermak, Chinatown to 95th Street overnight. And we've seen positive results in terms of the employee feedback as well as on the incidents that we're seeing on the system. So the focus has been very much on targeted smart deployment from a security perspective. We have also launched, and this is a key advancement, we are initiating a pilot of non-law enforcement personnel on CTA. That will continue into the 2026 budget, even under the baseline scenario. We're going to continue that work. So we've held a transit community safety workshop where we got input from stakeholders on that, and we're going to continue to advance that work into 2026. With regards to your fare question, I can have Tom McCone, our Chief Financial Officer, come up to kind of give a general overview of where that would place us in the region. So I'll let Tom talk a little bit, or in the industry, excuse me.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning. So we've been looking at peer comparisons for fares, both for bus and for rail fare, because often agencies do have different fares as we do for bus and rail, depending on the service. We know that New York recently increased theirs. They have a requirement to increase theirs kind of annually or biannually to keep up with inflation. SEPTA in Philadelphia also increased their fares as well. All of them were generally in this 10% range. New York's fare is kind of right at that $3 right now, kind of setting the benchmark for the industry. LA's fare is under $2, right? So they're at $1.75. So our current base fare for rail is $2.50. You can think about 10%. 10% of $2.50 is pretty easy to calculate, right? So you think about a quarter increase there, and then kind of how that goes through the entire system. But we think that 10% is kind of the right place to hit in terms of the fare increase at this moment, and kind of keeps us right in that spot within the industry. But it's not something that's limited to the base fare, because about half of our ridership, half our revenue comes from passes too. So the passes would be part of that as well.
Director Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So much like you, I had read a lot in the media the last 2 days. And so first off, I just want to shout out our folks in the media who do their job and make sure that we have all the information we need. A free and fair press is what this country is all about. So thank you to all of them who are here with us today. So one of the things that I read is the idea that cutting back on workforce, and I know that you all kind of addressed it, but it's one of those things like, if there's more on what you all have already done as far as like hiring freezes and things like that, because, as we talk about fare increases, Jim had mentioned that the fare increase back in the 80s really affected it for 20 years. And so, yes, I know we're talking about 10%, but it's like we really need to be careful about what a fare increase looks like, because the folks who need to ride it are, will pay it. But what about all of those casual riders that help prop the system up? And so, I just want to make sure that whatever it is we're doing, we're being thoughtful about it, and really doing what's best here, because we all talk about this as a problem that needs to get fixed, and it needs to get fixed now, but I can tell you, I don't know about the rest of you, in the last 3 days, I have gotten so many calls from people that are just saying, what the heck are you people doing? Like, what is going on? How do we go from 771 to 300, but now we know it's 200 million, and so it's like, are we giving Springfield the opportunity to kick this can down the road, and so like what, we just really need to make sure that everything that we're communicating, everything that we're doing is very spot on, very thought out, very, in line with what we need to be doing. So I don't know if you have any comments on that or.
I would agree. I thank you for your comments. I think it's a complex scenario in many respects, so it's important to be very clear. From CTA's perspective, and I think we've echoed it here in the region, there is change to 2026 due to one-time revenue in large part. The 2027 issue continues at a scale that people would recognize from all of the discussions we've been having for years. So that's really been a drumbeat I'm going to try to hit through this all. This is an ongoing problem. We see an impact to 2026, but we need to look to the out years. Our town hall, we shared a slide similar to what I shared with you today to make that point. And I think that's a key message here to continue to share with the legislature.
Yeah, I'll just add, if I can, there's not a moment that I don't, when I speak publicly, radio, hearings, I don't emphasize the fact that that 771 number is based on 2023 information, and that the positive variance that we've been seeing with the taxes, thank you all for your online sales, the increased ridership, and the holding down of some expense. In some cases, it's something we didn't want. We're having trouble hiring in some cases. So some of that expense reduction only comes from the fact that we can't do the job we really want to do. So we've been, every month our CFO gets up there and he states publicly, these are the positive numbers. I wish I had his job sometimes to be able to say it's positive every month. And we've been trying, I guess, to the free press, please listen to us and say that the variables have been changing. This is not stagnant. These numbers are not 2023 anymore.
And so you had mentioned that you guys are having difficulty hiring. And so like, my question is, in order to offer these programs, like we need to have the people in the office and people who are running these programs. And so, if we're doing a fare increase, and then things are going to decline even further before we start to reduce, train lines and things like that, like, do we have the personnel and workforce that we need to keep the service where it's at to justify an increase? Like people paying more, they're going to want to get more, but we know right now we can't give them more. And so like, do you guys have the infrastructure in your offices, in your personnel to keep the programs where they're at?
Yes, we do today. We, like a lot of in this industry, are seeing a huge bubble of boomers / people getting ready to retire within the next 5 years. So we're constantly trying to pull new people in to this industry. And so, yeah, today we absolutely have the ability not only to provide the service we're providing, but to try to enhance it. A little bit of our challenge is the National Railway Network. And one of the bigger nuances in this whole thing is what Metra controls and what Metra doesn't control. And I'll give you an example of that. The track. If we run one train on it or 100 trains on it, the only variance is going to be the fuel cost and the crew cost. Call it trackage. So if we're running on the UP Northwest line, a lot of people like to ride that line, the engineering costs of that, we're going to bear 100% regardless, because of the fact that the engineering folks that have to maintain that to Class 4 standards and all that, those are Union Pacific employees, and it's going to have to pass through. The employees that maintain the trains, we brought those over. Those are now Metra employees. And so a lot of the tracks we run on the National Railway Network, we have zero ability to control costs. We have agreements and that, but the zero ability to control costs with regard to keeping the railroad able to take the metro trains on it. And that includes the CN, the CPKC, the BNSF, and the UP, and a little bit on the Norfolk Southern as well. We get a little bit, CSX runs on us.
If I could add to that, it's Melinda Metzger speaking. We are continuing to hire. We hire every Thursday. The two locations, our Arlington Heights office and our Markham office. We need increased staff. And I am concerned that we're going to continue to proceed in getting the staffing we need. And hopefully we don't have to go into drastic service cuts where we have to turn around the successes that we're having now.
And at CTA, we are fully staffed and very proud of it. So our bus operators, we have more bus operators than we did pre-pandemic. In recent weeks, we have officially met our 2019 levels of rail staffing. So absolutely, this is not the time to mess up that momentum. Our service is strong. Our ridership is following. We set records in ridership over the summer we haven't seen in years. So that momentum is absolutely there. And I think that tone of focusing also on growth is a helpful balance in the discussion, that we are not constantly talking about the worst possible scenario repeatedly over and over again. That does matter to the public narrative. That has to be part of it. But equally, we need to talk about the opportunity to continue to grow, because what we're showing at CTA is that we know how to hire, we know how to get staffed up. If we get money to continue to invest, we can meet that demand to do that.
One last thing. We know that that the federal government is withholding money, a lot of money that should be going to our service agencies. So is there any sort of plan for all three service boards plus RTA, like to work together, get your attorneys, get the AG, what can we do to kind of put, to put pressure on the feds to give us what we're due?
I don't know if RTA wants to answer that. I'm not going to comment on the current status of news today with regards to federal funds. RTA and the agencies always work together on major issues affecting our region.
Yes, Director Mondero.
Thank you. I have a few questions, and as other board members have mentioned, thank you very much for your professional and thorough presentations and compelling. Nora mentioned that CTA will have to cut 1,800 positions in mid-2026. I'm wondering for Jim at Metra, how many layoffs are you anticipating in 2026?
Again, it's going to be very deliberate in the reductions and where we can and can't shed employees. And some of it comes right down to the vehicles that have to be operated, right? So I'm going to hate to say it in this way, but it's super complicated. Through the contracts, we have the ability to have sometimes the crew go back out and run another run again versus having two crews to do two sets of runs. They're all different lines, so they're all different qualified on different areas. It's super complicated, and it really comes back down to what I was talking about, not creating service holes. It's hundreds of employees if it gets down to the latter end of this where no funding's available for certain. It goes across the board, but in a lot of cases, it's not just a one size fits all. Again, running on the guideway elements that we run on, we're subject to a lot of different inspection requirements, things like that. Whether we run one train or 100, that inspector still has to do his job. The periodicity that ties have to be changed out, the signal systems that have to be maintained. Again, 1 or 100 trains. So unless we do get to a point in time where we're saying several line, the real cost savings aren't there. So it's going to come down to how do we most efficiently use the personnel that we have? In some cases, are we moving trains from one yard to another yard just so we don't have to put coach cleaners in 2 yards? what expense does that take to move the trains? And we'll have to do a lot of calculus in some respects with regard to when service cuts start, if they have to occur.
Okay, no, thank you, and I appreciate that. I know that when you had previously spoken at a prior ad hoc meeting, you had given a number in an approximate estimate for what Metro might have to cut for next year. So I'm just wondering now with the reduced budget, it sounds like at least 1,800 might be easily over 2,000 total employees between CTA and Metro, from what I'm hearing from you.
You know, Director, I think looking at our budget projections right now, we anticipate no service cuts physical in 26 unless things change, and that's our plan. Our work plan is going to be that. However, we're going to have to, in 26, plan for the inevitable in 27 if funding doesn't get realized.
Okay, got it. My next question is directed to Pace and Melinda. I know that the slide 10, the fiscal cliff preliminary estimates show 2026 TAP wrap has a deficit of 49 million, 2027 57, and 2028 58 million. I think Melinda mentioned that this is based on what we as an RTA board had approved back in June, right? So that it would be limited to 30 TAP wrap rides monthly for the riders. We've all heard from the disability community, if we were to eliminate those reductions, I'm wondering, has it generated a number, like what would TAP wrap grow to in terms of the cost? And so whether it's Melinda or Malik, if anyone knows.
The projections in your, in that slide are if the, tap and wrap program remained as it is right now with the 30 rides per month. And it's showing a growth, but keeping the parameters that we have right now. Does that answer your question?
No, so it's going based on what we've initially voted on in June? Is that
Correct.
right?
So
Correct.
those estimates assume that the action plan remains active and folks have access to 30 rides per month. We are looking at sort of action plan 2.0 after the comments that have been received, but everything depends of what comes out of the veto session, and then we'll come back to you with updated estimates of what is possible in terms of caps and what the future looks like. But our goal was to save between $2 and $3 million of spending per month when we came up with the action plan. So all of that would go back on top of the growth rate. So we'd be looking at a significant increase in those numbers if the programs stayed previous to the action plan.
So I'm just wondering, when will you have the more defined numbers for us to consider? Because we want to continue to have this dialogue with the disability community, and I'm just wondering how that will impact the looming deficits that will impact 2026.
Malik, do you want to take a shot at that, or do you want me to take a shot at that?
Melinda, why don't you take a shot at that? But I wanted to share something with the RTA that was shared with our board at our last meeting, but why don't you answer the director's question first?
Okay, well, I think the situation that we're in right now is that we are being funded by, the RTA a certain level, and that has to cover the traditional ADA paratransit service that we put on the street that is within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route. So that is being covered. Then we have about $20 million more to play with to put wrap and tap service out there. That will bring us through March. I think the concern is that if there is no new funding, we won't be able to put additional service out there. And I know Director Kenny, did you want to add to that?
Well, after our last ad hoc committee meeting, the PACE board had their regular monthly meeting. And I just wanted to share with you the actual ridership numbers, so you have an understanding of what the magnitude of the situation is. In 2024, we had 1.6 million rides for Chicago ADA. This year, we have 1.6 million rides. For 2024 for suburban ADA, we had 482,000. This year we have 467,000. Last year for RAP, 219,000 rides year to date. This year, 1.4 million. So it's, when the chairman said in his opening remarks, and affectionately termed RAP and TAP, this is a service that is very, very important to the disability community. And I wanted to get those numbers in front of you to show you just that growth. And in terms of TAP, last year it was 664,000. It's up to 772,000. And to put that in perspective, because TAP has been around longest, 2019, so pre-pandemic, it was only 150,000. It's now up over 700,000. So it's really an important piece that we've been having ongoing dialogue about. And thank you for raising the question, but we need to continue this dialogue and have this dialogue with the state legislature, because they have to understand how important RAP and TAP is and how it fits into what PACE does, because the RAP and TAP and ADA, how that compares with the fixed route suburban bus routes. So it's really an important piece. I think we continue to talk about it and really, make sure we put faces with the numbers.
Chris, no good deed goes unpunished, because this is an innovative program that the RTA helped drive. So we have more than 1 million people that have wanted this innovative program. But when you're talking about the legislature, you're talking about a group that on ADA paratransit mandated federal civil rights issue only reimburses us 4% or thereabouts of a $500 million type of program. So, they are woefully not aware, apparently, of the importance of people with disabilities or ADA paratransit. And as I've told people who have testified here over the last few months on ADA paratransit, you need to go see your state legislator, because they clearly have no feel for responsibility of a federal mandate in taking care of transportation for people with disabilities. And the problem is Springfield.
And I'm very lucky, Mr. Chairman, because my seatmate at PACE is Rachel Arfa, who is the director of the City of Chicago's Office for People with Disabilities. And so watching and listening to Rachel and see how she has worked with the disability community, both in the city and the suburbs, is really enlightening. And I'm fortunate to have her as my colleague to really drive home these points. And I think that we all have to work to drive it home to the General Assembly, as you suggest.
And just an additional comment for our board specifically, several of you have been involved in some follow-up conversations on this topic in the interim. We have at the staff level also engaged in further dialogue with the leadership of the disability community over the past several weeks, and we have another follow-up conversation in the coming week or so. We intend to come, as we'd noted before, to come back to the full RTA board to discuss kind of future steps and additional actions and recommendations. And our intention was to do that after we sort of had some sense of the outcome from veto and have a more thorough conversation with you about what does that look like in terms of programmatic changes, funding, et cetera. And wanted to just have a bit more certainty around potentially what may or may not be funding options as we go forward.
So I guess my clarifying comment on this topic is that hearing from Malik saying that the savings that we voted on in June is saving RTA about 2 million.
Yeah,
monthly.
we're anticipating just those caps and the fare increase expected to save 2 to 3 million a month, but that doesn't account for the potential continued
True.
growth rate.
So yeah, so it's at least, so like when I see that it's a $202 million shortfall down from 789, we can add easily at least 36 million on that, if not even more, if we were to maintain RAP and TAP in the manner that the disability community wants us to maintain it, right? So that's a fair comment.
Yeah, the deficit would grow.
Okay. One other question I have, it's a follow-up to Director Lewis's question to Nora about security. I always commend and admire so much what the service boards and CTA does in terms of security. But I think my question to what Michael asked was, the security budget, it seems to be that what you're presenting is like for flat, like overall flat budget in terms of security, that we're not like doing any profoundly big increase in the security budget. I think that would be in your scenario 3 budget. Like, hey, if we were to get appreciably more money from Springfield, we would be able to do X more in terms of security. Is that correct?
When we release our budget, we do plan to identify different types of technological strategies and other work that we can do, including what the potential of expanding the non-law enforcement pilot would look like from a pilot to a more comprehensive force of non-law enforcement on CTA. As you all know, the Chicago Police Department is who provides law enforcement on CTA through their own budget. So what CTA puts in its budget with regards to security are with regards to our security guards, technological advancements, and other new initiatives. So we will propose in the expanded budget what it would look like to expand the non-law enforcement personnel on CTA.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Director Yonan.
Thank you all for your PowerPoint slides, your testimony today. A lot of great information for all of us. And we know as the budgets get submitted and as you mentioned, President Larson, going out when your public meetings individually, you're going to be talking about your programs. And I think what we've got gathered here today is an opportunity to talk about, and Director Dewinski said that there's a lot of collaboration that's happening. We know that, but we just don't know if there's always that forum where you're all together to talk a little bit about that. And respectfully, President Larson, we know that you have to be careful in your words as to how maybe some things with collaboration might be happening. Director Dewinski, I think it goes a long way when you say that the Blue Island branch isn't something you'd even consider if there isn't going to be the backup service with some of your colleagues. But just maybe some examples that you could today just share again with the media that's here today and the rest of us on some of those collaborative efforts that would just, again, build your individual budget hearings up to say, this is how we're working together as an entire service board. And welcome some of those comments. Thank you.
Sure, I think it's a great point, Director Yonan, and a continued topic that can be further enhanced publicly in how we work together. From the bus perspective with PACE, we work regularly to think about bus planning studies around improving bus infrastructure in the region. With Metro, we also work together on rail infill station studies and planning for future investments in the region. On a day-to-day basis, our service teams work together. Jim just called me recently around a planned station closure and making sure that we have our service around the Obama Center appropriately coordinated, for example. So we can continue to lay out that discussion as we talk about investments in the region, and even in potential service cuts, we're already in discussions with PACE to make sure that when we lay out the bus route impact, it makes sense with the service that's in their area as well.
And I will add to what Nora just indicated. We meet on a constant basis, probably daily, with both CTA and Metro. And as we look at potential service cuts, we're looking where we can fill the gap for either CTA and Metro. And we also work with both agencies on such items that, like procurement. We're working with CTA right now on procuring electric buses, doing a joint procurement. We've worked with Metro to get computer equipment in. We work with Metro on a regular basis when there are service issues. We fill the gap for them in those situations, as well as in some of the lines where they don't have a lot of service. Sometimes we fill the gap for the service that Metro can't provide due to some issues with the amount of service they can put on tracks.
I think I'll just add on, Director Yonan, that obviously both agencies, CTA and PACE, right now are looking at their bus vision. We participate in that we're the elephant in the room when it comes down to the fixed route. I mean, we unfortunately have to follow, those tracks and there's only so many trains and there's only so many slots. So really the flexible piece of all this is the buses, and that's the key component. Down in the city here, we really don't have coordination with CTA trains. That's because wherever you can get off a metro train and get on a CTA train, they're so readily available down here in the city. So it's really the spoke portion that we really, will coordinate more with the two other agencies on their bus revision.
And John, just on cooperation and coordination, I had a lengthy meeting with most of the senior staff and many of the staff here yesterday at the RTA, and multiple members of our staff said, we talk to our service board counterparts 5 to 6 times a day. So, there is massive coordination and talking between the RTA and the service boards on a daily basis. And, we're not talking once or twice a day. We are talking many times a day where the various staffs talk between themselves.
I appreciate that, Chairman. I think, again, that's what the public and all of us need to hear. So thank you for that.
And I think it's been that way for a long time, or at least since I got here, or Leanne got here. Director Lewis.
This question is actually for Malik. Before we talked a little bit about the impact on non-six county areas for any kind of potential shutdown and impact on those areas, your numbers didn't include any potential impact on those areas from the actions that the service boards anticipate. Is that a correct statement?
Our larger economic impact study does look at general impacts that cascade down. In the past, we have talked about especially capital contracts, but there are operational contracts at agencies too, where the equipment or other items may be procured across the state or even outside of the state. So we are working to always sort of document how there's a larger view here at scale, to your point. But we also, through the survey effort, can drill down a little bit more and look at the visitor impact of how transit is a big part of people coming to downtown in general and visiting not just from these 6 counties, but outside of that, transferring from Amtrak and buses, or just flying into O'Hare and Midway, and transit is a huge share of that. So we can definitely amplify that further, but our larger analysis with CT and Argonne or with consultants have generally looked at all riders being impacted by these cuts in the future.
I appreciate that. I think that sometimes it gets lost in our conversations, which are so inward focused about the larger impact. And I'd like the legislature to make sure that they consider that, as well as what we're doing in the service agencies when they make this analysis. The second point I want to raise is, I know there was a request for a safety report to maintain federal dollars for safety. And my question was, has this been done? I'm not sure who this might be applicable to, but was that safety report done? And is there a copy of that report that has been brought into the analysis for federal dollars for safety on transit?
I think you're referencing the recent letter from the U.S. Department of Transportation to me at CTA, and that letter is being submitted today, and we're happy to share the response with you.
Thank you. Director Koteric. Oh, I'm sorry. Director Ross.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks everybody for being here. As we started these meetings, I mentioned how our collective action is really the most powerful thing that we have to address the situation. And there's something that President Learson said about anxiety and fear, which I think is incredibly relevant to the moment that we have. And I think the proper way to address that is both working together, and I also think it's transparency, and I think it's trust. And I think today, in our small section of the world of transit and helping people get to where they need to go, to see their family, to get to work, to get to school, we're starting to demonstrate that transparency and that trust. And I think there's still a ways to go, but today we've made some progress in explaining to the audiences that are most important in this moment, the public, and the General Assembly of what the consequences are of inaction. I think it's been clunky, getting these numbers out. I think Director Ryan had sort of mentioned this is some of the folks in the General Assembly think we're heading on the steep side of a mountain, turned off the GPS, cut the lights, which is not the case. This is a dynamic situation. I think we really got to figure out a way to communicate this much better. I think, the website that we have, 4 different, sort of spreadsheets that we have in front of us isn't sufficient to communicate the complexity of what funding is coming in, the limited ability for us to shift around it. But the bottom line that we keep communicating, which is true, is that this is all coming due. We're seeing these cliffs in cascades. We're already there. The first casualty has been the RAP and TAP program with caps and changes. The second half is going to be fare increases. That's coming on due. The next will be CTA cuts and layoffs. Jim, you're next with your Metro cuts. PACE has in their budget that the RAP and TAP program's gone in April, totally gone. These consequences now are finally being understood, and I think we have to even bring, more transparency into this exercise and sort of communicate it much better. Really, a question is, how can we do that? I don't know if it's a dashboard or something else, but I think, building on that trust, using the information that we've put out today, and doing it in a way that's really just easily digestible so that folks understand this, I think is issue number 1 for the October veto session. I think we need that to happen, and I think that's a key ingredient to making it happen.
Thank you. I mean, Tom, our job here is to cobble together as much funding as possible to stave off service cuts. And, our new fiscal cliff numbers are, were requested by the legislature. So we're doing what the legislature wanted us to do. But as you can tell from this meeting today, it's very hard everything's fairly fluid. But we give them our best numbers possible so that they can make their policy decisions. Did you have something to add, Leanne?
No, and I was just going to sort of build on that is our intention to digest the information. And I think as we've talked about with the board, we've been sort of talking about the components of all of this. We talk about it every single month here, including monthly financials, including quarterly certifications of the financials to actually document how the sales tax, the additional sales tax is being captured and what it's being used for. So it's also been, details are being sort of captured in the budget call that you guys approved back much earlier this year. The funding marks, that you approved just the other month as well. They actually are all the components to this adjustment in the number. And we'd said sort of always, as Maulik noted at the very top end of this, year over year, we've adjusted the fiscal cliff based as part of the budget process. And that's what we're doing here. And our ultimate goal in all of this was to, stave off service cuts as long as possible. And I think what you're seeing here today is is sort of the product of some of that work. It is, we recognize that we have to sort of refine how we're communicating, building on the website that, Director Katarik noted, looking to identify simpler to some extent and easier ways to explain this very complex, multifaceted kind of, and I think it's less about sort of the actual number. I think the point is on all of this, the service boards are working their budgets through now. They have shared with you today more detail at an earlier time frame in the budget process than has ever sort of happened. It's not the normal cadence of budget work, but that was very purposely as asked for by you and some of the members of the General Assembly to sort of provide as much information on an ongoing basis. So there is a level of dynamicism and fluidity to this as we continue to go along. So, I think we have to give the service boards also too some credit and a little space in terms of sort of refining those numbers. So there might be some tweaks and changes. But I think the components of how the changes, the actual deficit and gap have occurred have been very well documented sort of for more than a year to some extent, and what sort of how we've gotten to this point today. I think the work for us to do now is, once we get sort of those final numbers from the service boards, to continue to communicate. And it's not just about the cliff, but it's about the improvements, the efficiencies, the savings that the three service boards have continued to work on and develop, how we can use that to try to provide some time for the legislature to further consider their actions going forward, with an ultimate, as I keep saying over and over again, the ultimate end game here is to stave off service cuts for as long as possible, because that is the most impactful piece that impacts riders across our region. And that is the sort of the last straw that we kind of don't want to have to break if we don't have to. And I think that that's the collective effort of all of us in the work that we're doing over the coming months. So more to come, and we hear that we need to continue to evolve how this complex, like layering of information, if you will, gets presented to both the public and the General Assembly. And we continue those conversations with the General Assembly. All of us did, just in the sort of August timeframe, spent several hours, for example, with the House Working Group, and sort of documenting and talking through all these components and what these pieces are looking like. So, you know, we continue those conversations, and we will continue to update sort of the public-facing information as well.
None of this is a surprise to the legislature. Director Ross?
Just to echo your comments at the start of the meeting, I think we need to emphasize again for the public that we are an efficient regional system. By any objective measure across the country, this area is efficient and effective. Do we have issues that need to be addressed? Absolutely. Not the least of which is RAP and TAP, in my opinion. We need to find a solution to that. But we also have to recognize that the legislature is under immense pressure to fund lots of activities, not just transportation. And so anything that we can do to enhance our story and push it, in a sense, to the top of the list, I think, you know, allows us to, in a sense, be first in line, hopefully, for any significant funding opportunities. I'm just concerned that, you know, messages out there that we're incompetent, so to speak, or that we don't know what's going on, or that our numbers are changing daily, those just aren't facts. And we also need to say that. That's just not a fact. Our staff has pointed out the $200 million increase in tax revenue every month for at least the last 3 months, maybe before that, at least the last 3 that I can recall. So it's not that the information isn't out there. Maybe at times, you know, we don't realize that we need the information at that point, and so we say we didn't have it, when in fact we did. This is not new information.
Dr. Carey, you have something?
I just wanted to, Director Ross kind of made some of the same points I want to make. I wanted to follow up on what Leanne was saying, and echo again what Director Ross is saying, in that it's not new information. And I understand when you take, you know, we've been preaching about 700, and then all of a sudden it's 200, and people go, you know, whoa, they obviously don't know what they're doing. Not the case. We've talked, and there were articles in the paper, you know, months ago saying, oh, well, there's all this new sales tax revenue. You know, when RTA, when are you going to give us a new number? And we've been working towards that new number. And I want to give kudos, you know, as a board member, I want to give kudos to the RTA staff and the Service Bureau staff, you know, to make the changes. Some of it, a lot of it was the sales tax revenue, but the other part was, as Leanne said, we wanted to, a goal from the very beginning was to put off any service cuts as long as we possibly could. So we're doing that. We are doing that. And the people in this room have done it. So that's why the number has gone down. But as everybody's pointed out, come 27, it's right back up there. So it's not a figment of anybody's imagination. All of you in this room, got creative and figured out a way to make it work and get through 26 for the most part. And then I want to make a comment on RAP and TAP, in that, I understand in your presentation, if Melinda's still with us, without additional funding, TAP Rapid would be suspended. Should the state fail to act in the veto session, which would be, I think, disappointing to everybody in the entire region, we then kick in our, I know staff's already working on, point 2.0 on what to do with RAP and TAP, but we don't want to stop it. We don't want to stop it. So, if budgets come to December and we don't have any money from the state, I'm just saying we have to make changes to the program, possibly further beyond the 30-month cap. But we want to keep that going. And I just want to put that out there that, we figure out some way to fund it and to make further changes to make it economically viable. So, thanks.
Thank you, Director Carey.
And
Anything
Director,
else? Yes.
Director Carey, thank you for your comments. We appreciate that. We want to put more service out there, and we'll continue to work and see what we can do to keep this service going.
Thank you, Melinda.
Great. Any other questions or comments from the panel? Yes, Director.
Could
Rouse.
you or someone summarize now what the next steps are for this committee? What our next action plan is?
Malik, you want to tell us what our next plan or next steps are?
Well, I
We
can.
will, when we adjourn today, it'll be subject to the call of the chair when we meet again. And I do want to point out, when you're talking transparency, look at who's in this room. Look at who's at this table. This is on the internet. So it is, it's about as transparent as anything I've ever seen in state government or city government history in this particular region.
I would just add that over the next couple of weeks, you will see the official preliminary budgets from each service board come out. That's actually when RTA staff starts to put together our regional budget to propose that. We go into public hearings. So all of that process kicks off and overlays right on top of the veto session. So this will continue to be extremely dynamic, as you mentioned, over the next couple of months before the regional budget is presented to this board in November for a vote in December. So we anticipate changes the next 3 months, depending on the outcomes in Springfield and otherwise from the feedback that you have provided today.
That answer your question, JD? Thank you. All right. So shall we move on to the public comment section of, and Nora, Jim, and Melinda, thank you. Director Canning, Chairman McMahon, Lester Barkley is here. Thank you all so much for your time and efforts here. We're all in this together. Thank you. Public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 5 is the public comment segment of the meeting. We've received notice that the following people would like to comment. A reminder that we do have a time limit of 3 minutes. I'm always a little flexible, especially with the type of witnesses we have today. But Paula Worthington from the Civic Federation, you want to kick us off, Paula? Come on up. Any seat. Grab a microphone. Don't be shy. Tom Koterek's never shy. Your previous chairmen have are never shy, and make sure the green button's on.
Better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Good morning, Chairman Dillard and members of the Ad hoc Committee on Transit Funding. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. My name is Paula Worthington, Senior Policy Advisor at the Civic Federation, a 131-year-old nonpartisan government research organization whose mission is promoting prudent fiscal management, effectiveness, and efficient delivery of services by state and local governments. The Civic Federation, along with a number of other civic and business-oriented organizations, sent a letter to this committee earlier this week, reiterating the urgency of transparency in this moment. Our letter echoed several of the items that Chairman Dillard included in his September 11th letter to the Transit Board chairs, calling for updates on the fiscal cliff and the timeline and details of the immediate impacts of the funding shortfall. The Civic Federation recognizes the steps the RTA and service boards have taken to produce this updated information about the fiscal cliff and the size of projected budget gaps over the next 3 years, as well as details of opportunities for efficiencies, cost savings, and system-generated revenue. We've heard a lot about those kinds of things this morning in today's meeting. We welcome all of this information and view it as critical to building a case to taxpayers and transit riders for the solutions that will be necessary to resolve the impending fiscal crisis. In addition, we encourage sharing additional details such as the size of the estimated budget gap by month and service board, details about the exact services that would be cut, and details of what a new fare structure might look like. We also highlight the importance of sharing plans for the improvements in safety, service, and convenience that riders, both current and prospective, want to see. There's no basis for asking taxpayers for hundreds of millions of dollars without meaningful governance reform and significant improvements to the existing systems. Therefore, we urge you to produce public-facing information on the estimated costs of improving service, including the new services in House Bill 3438, the use of pay-go versus debt funds for capital projects, and estimates for potential new revenue options. We know some of this work is already being done, indeed has been done, as we have learned today. But the key here is sharing it with the public and inviting further discussion and deliberation. The most recent downward revision of the fiscal year 2026 budget gap to about $200 million shows that the service boards can find ways to reduce costs, but any near-term budget relief will be short-lived and does not absolve the transit agencies and state legislature from passing both short and long-term funding solutions and governance reforms. As the Illinois General Assembly soon reconvenes for veto session, all of this detailed information will be critical to informing the actions needed to head off a fiscal crisis. With deadlines quickly approaching, we hope to avoid the same breakdowns that occurred at the end of the spring legislative session with House Bill 3438. With transparent and clear communication of the facts, challenges, and policy options intended to build trust among all stakeholders and the public, we believe that consensus on governance and funding reforms can be reached and the case for more funding fully made, thus supporting our transit system and its contributions to the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Any comments or questions for Paula? Thank you. I read that letter 4 or 5 times, and most of the signatories are friends and longtime associates of mine. And there's no group that we have more respect for, I have more respect for than the Civic Federation. And I would be remiss if I always talk about how Lawrence Massall, your legendary president or leader, was once my intern right out of Knox College. And in spite of working under OSHA violation, physical conditions in the governor's office, he went on to a great career and just missed every minute of the day. So thank you, Paul, very much.
Thank you.
Lena Guerrero Reynolds, you here? Hi, Lena. Good morning. Come on up. From the Environmental Law and Policy Center.
Can you hear me? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Lena Guerrero Reynolds, and I'm a communications and policy advocate with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, a member of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, and I'm a lifelong transit rider. I'm here to call on the RTA and the transit agency to not kick the can down the road and support needed solutions in Springfield. Today's projections may push the fiscal cliff off by a few more months, but the reality is that the problem will only get worse if we don't fix it now. Any funding bill will need time to ramp up for new funding sources to come into effect. We hoped today's specifics would help light a fire under transit riders and their state representatives to pass the transit bill during this month's veto session, to see what train and bus lines are at risk so it becomes tangible. Telling them no problem next spring does not help, and what does it cost us long term? I get that nobody wants to be the bad guy, to put out scary numbers that will worry your riders or employees, but if you downplay the severity of this situation, then lawmakers won't feel the urgency that this moment truly requires. It also begs the question, what aren't you spending money on that you should be? Riders are still experiencing massive gaps in service, seeing people with disabilities lose options they depend on, still haunted by ghost buses, and desperately trying to avoid smelly train cars that aren't cleaned often enough. As they say in business, you've got to spend money to make money, and if you do not spend the money to make transit an appealing way to travel, you will not rebuild the ridership we need for a long-term fiscally sustainable future. Every time the can gets kicked further down the road, transit riders feel it. We're in that can rattling down the railroad now, and we're sick of it. Today, we heard that transit agencies are expecting a $200 million gap next year, but the gap is right back up over $700 million the next year. I understand this is a dynamic situation, but I want to remind everyone that CMAP's Plan of Action for Regional Transit estimates over $1 billion gap in just a few years. If we don't rebuild ridership, it gets even worse. This isn't just a cliff, this is a growing chasm. Throwing some loose change in to cushion the blow for half a year doesn't get us to the other side. We need $1.5 billion and substantive reform to expand service, grow ridership, and build the transit system that Northeastern Illinois deserves. These new budgets include none of the reforms negotiated this spring and passed by the Senate. We need transit agencies that aren't incentivized to compete with one another for riders and funds. We need coordinated schedules and fares so people can complete their trip without paying twice or waiting forever. We need more frequent service throughout the day and week so riders don't have to memorize a schedule just to get on and ride. We need safety improvements like an interdepartmental police task force and transit ambassadors to reduce crime and connect people with social services. And we need transit to be a more viable alternative to driving throughout the region if we want to tackle the climate crisis. CTA, Metra, and PACE have all made great strides to adjust to new post-pandemic travel patterns, and I appreciate their prudent desire to be efficient and stave off layoffs. But it's not enough if we don't pass this bill. This is about more than budgets. It's about equity, climate, safety, and whether Northeastern Illinois has a future with a world-class transit system or a shrinking one that leaves people behind. I urge you to level with the public, stand with riders and workers, and press lawmakers to pass the reforms and funding we need this veto session. Not next year, not when it's too late, now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Amen. Any questions or comments? You know, I always tell before you get away with the environmental and your title, mass transit. If you care about the environment, mass transit is only 2 to 3%, and we move 1.4 million riders a day in this area. We are only a few percent of the greenhouse gas emissions facing Northeastern Illinois. So if you care about the air we breathe, mass transit, get on it, because that's the one single thing people can do about the environment immediately. But your testimony was outstanding. Excellent.
Thank you.
Orlando Rojas, come on up. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the RTA Board. My name is Orlando Rojas. I am a proud resident of the village of Mokina in suburban Will County, and I also happen to be a train conductor at Metro's Rock Island District, which runs from LaSalle Street Station here in the Loop to Joliet. I'm also a union member represented by the Transportation Division of SMART, the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Union. A little bit about me. So, growing up, I always thought I'd go on to college to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, professional of some sort. And however, life can be funny, and an unexpected turn of events led me to pursue a career in the railroad industry instead. In 1999, I became a young father. I needed to provide for my family. And in 2002, the opportunity to work at Metro came up. Metro was expanding its Southwest service line from Orland Park to Manhattan and was hiring. I knew that if I worked hard, a career at Metro would reward me with benefits and the good quality of life I so desperately wanted to provide my young son and wife. I knew that it was a good job because I saw how my own father, a Mexican immigrant, worked on the railroad and saw firsthand how his union job afforded our family health care, time off to go to the doctor, fair wages, and an overall great quality of life. I always felt a calling to help people, and I get to do that by making sure people get to and from where they need to go, that they're safe on our trains, And if they're in need, ensure they have the assistance required to have the smoothest ride possible. Metro was a lifeline for me, and it has been for so many others. I'm one of hundreds, if not thousands, of stories. Yet today I stand here wondering if I'll have a job a year or two from now. My job is a highlight of my life, and I think that layoffs being issued after 20 plus years facing that as a possibility is just heartbreaking. I love my job. I care about our customers. I worry for my colleagues who are facing the very real threat of pink slips. Many of us are left wondering if we will be able to put gifts under the Christmas tree or pay our heat bills, if not this winter, next winter. The RTA, we're counting on you. We need you to work with Springfield to find a solution to this fiscal cliff, one that is lasting. As our Illinois General Assembly heads into veto session, the choice in front of us is clear. Are we going to kick the can down the road and push the fiscal cliff off another year or two? Or are we willing to take a bold action and deliver on the revenue and reforms that workers and riders have been asking for? The time to act is now. Workers, families, communities, we're all counting on you. We need the RTA, along with our legislature, to solve our transit fiscal cliff and deliver a safe, fast, and reliable transit system that workers, riders, and Northeast Illinois all deserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You're an excellent spokesman for the 14,000 or so employees of mass transit that Director Learson pointed. And Nora K. Ryan here is also a great protector and reminder to all of us every day about the employees that work at all three of our service boards. Any questions or comments? Great comments. And I think you testified in front of some of the Senate committee at some point in time too, because I remember your discussion vividly about your young son and your father. So thank you very much. You're a
Thank
great
you.
witness.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
All right, Michael
We have,
Van.
yeah, I can, we
Yeah.
have two more people signed up for public
Yep,
comment.
please.
Daryl Bruin.
Daryl, come on up. And welcome. Thank you. Morning.
Hello? Okay. Good morning. My name is Darrell Brewer. I am a lifelong public transit rider. I also am a vehicle service attendant for PACE and a proud union member, as well as a union representative with Teamsters Local 727. As a vehicle service attendant, I clean and sanitize the PACE vehicles to make sure that those who rely on our services can have a clean, safe, and healthy trip. My colleagues that operate paratransit work hard to help people get to and from where they need to go when other modes of transit might not be available. And as a vehicle service attendant, I want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. We are professionally trained to serve our customers, many of whom are elderly and disabled, and rely on PACE to get to and from their health care. Appointments and live their lives with dignity. I love my job, especially knowing that I'm helping people who are in need. However, the lack of resolution I've seen to solve our transit fiscal cliff worries me. I am worried not just for myself, but for the people that our transit system colleagues who dedicate their lives to serve the public yet show up to work every day wondering if pink slips will be issued. I am worried for my 14-year-old son who relies on CTA to get to and from school every day. In the 8 years I've been on the job, I have never been late to work. I do not own a car and rely on public transit to get me to and from where I need to be, just like PACE customers rely on transit workers to help them reach their destination. Now is not the time to cut funding for transit. It is the time to invest. At a time when our workforce is facing so much uncertainty, Illinois can lead and demonstrate that it cares about its residents, invest in its transit infrastructure, and ensure that all riders have access to public transportation. Whether that's the PACE, Metro, or CTA, RTA, I am asking you to address our transit fiscal cliff. This isn't about you or me. This is about Illinois, the future of our state, its people, and our economy. Illinoisans deserve a world-class transit system. Now is the time to work with Springfield and pass both revenues and reform in the upcoming veto session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer, very much. Appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
And last person we have is Chris Ramos.
Chris. Thank you for being here as well.
My name is Chris Ramos. I am a community organizer with Access Living, and I'm here representing our disability community. I'm here today not to address the RTA, but to address the general public and the Illinois General Assembly, and to place my comments firmly on the public record. Your initial presentation frames these new fiscal projections as though they are part of a deliberate effort to close the budget gap. In reality, this only deepens the public's misunderstanding created by your own lack of transparency. The RTA is supposed to provide oversight and accountability for our local transit agencies, yet you have misled not only the general public, but also the disability community that depends on you. I have attended RTA meetings all year, and not once were these new projections shared. Instead, you forced us into one of two choices: accept the loss of transit service and jobs, or support your recommendations. Meanwhile, you have already upended transportation for the disability community by targeting the RAP and TAP program, one of the only reliable transportation options for people with disabilities. But let me be clear. The problem of unsafe and unreliable service through PACE paratransit has been documented for years. Yet rather than addressing these failures, you have doubled down on policies that cut off our access and independence. People with disabilities remain reliant on public transportation to live our daily lives, but according to your calculations, we should only need one trip per day. That is why it's difficult to even accept your emotional examples provided, because when people with disabilities have been giving you countless examples of the harm your cuts will cause, you went ahead and did it anyway. This is not a serious understanding of human dignity or community life. We all deserve better. The public deserves better. Illinois residents deserve a transit agency that provides transparency and trusted oversight. We all deserve safe, reliable, and affordable transportation. And the Illinois General Assembly must deliver progressive revenue solutions that adequately fund mass transit for all of us. Because at the end of the day, this is not only about numbers on a balance sheet, it's about trust, dignity, and our right to move freely in our communities. Without transparency, without accountability, and without real solutions, the RTA undermines the very purpose of public transit. We deserve and demand better. Thank you.
Thank you. Make sure you talk to those legislators about filling that gap on ADA funding. Joy, does that finish our public comment tours?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we're on to other business. Any other business to come before the committee today? As Director Ross asked Malik, you sort of know where we're going in the future. The next committee meeting will be subject to the call of the chair. So if there's no further business to come before this committee, I will entertain a motion and a second to adjourn. Director Lewis moves we adjourn, seconded by Director Carey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and